welcome everybody. Today we have return guest Jacob Gerhardt. Jacob is reviewing Darkness with us. We'll get to that, but welcome, Jacob. Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Nice.
Yes, well, we are about to veer into some very dark and twisted areas for us. We're talking about the 1987 true crime book, Echoes in the Darkness. And I would say that people might, as we're talking about this, and it's going to delve into some straight, really, I don't know, twisted paths. We have to remember this is about teachers. This is centered on teachers and a very outrageous administrator. So people can start to see the connection, at least in the beginning, because then it's going to go way out there. But before we do this, and it is the story of a particular teacher who one day, this teacher, Susan Reinert, I'm forgetting what she taught at the moment. English.
Mm-hmm.
Who was found murdered one day in the back of a car, the trunk of a car, and the ensuing investigation. And also, we would have to add to that the disappearance at first of her children and the investigation into that. So, Mr. Gerhardt, tell me about your understanding of this author, Joseph Wambaugh.
Well, he's the crime guy, right? I mean, he has been for quite some time. This is the only book of his that I've read, but I'm familiar. Or no, besides, I've read Hollywood Station, and but this is more than the book and the author. I mean, this was on the news every night when I was growing up.
Oh.
It was nonstop. Upper Marion High School, we played them in sports. I mean, it was a local story, and it was, and this is interesting. I was talking to my mother about it because I told her, I said she was reading a book that she enjoyed, and I said, I can't put down this book, The Echoes in the Darkness. It's the second time I've read it. And she remembered all of the details of the case.
Oh, geez.
Like somebody who was living in Philadelphia at that time did not forget the names and the people and that story. And of course, my mother said they never found the children. They never found the children. That was what was really devastating more than anything. It's heartbreaking.
Yes. So this is centered around this particular teacher who was seeing Susan Reinert for a moment, for a bit. And also what complicates things is the administrator, J.C. Smith, was also implicated in this crime. And so this resulted, before this video started, this resulted in a bit of a debate, I would say, Jacob, but I think we kind of agree.
I think so.
Talked a little bit about it. But I guess where I should start is by saying that if you think about the story, what makes it chilling is what you said right there, Mr. Gerhardt, that it involved children that were never found. So, people have been talking lately about this Netflix special with Jeffrey Dahmer, and we've talked about these different true crimes, but there's something about a crime against a child that just, it goes beyond, where it's a particular kind of evil. And as you read this, it is, you could feel it's palpable. I guess I could go with either of you. Which character is the most memorable to you? And then we'll go more into the debate of what the result is of this crime. So maybe I should say, we're talking about a woman who disappeared, who was seeing this guy, Bill Bradfield, who was one of the teachers there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the direction of the investigation was pointed in his way because his name was on the will. He was a beneficiary of Susan Reinert. And this was by careful machinations, by manipulations of these people around him in the school. that are so diabolical. You cannot help. I don't know how you feel about Bradfield, but I despise this man. How could you not? The level of dishonesty towards him and the building case towards him from this basically cult-like atmosphere he built around the school. I'll just throw this out at all of you, but it's littered with all these interesting characters. What would you say is the most memorable character? And I'll just throw that out.
Go ahead, Jake. I'll follow you.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's definitely going to be Bradfield, because J.C. Smith is, as sick as he is, he comes across as an everyday sociopath, as if there's such a thing. But the way Bradfield controlled those people, you got the feeling that he could see someone who was weak, and someone who was naive, and someone who was gullible. And it was a con that went on forever, right? One of the most interesting aspects that I came across, I was laughing about it, thinking about it. No one ever saw him reading a book. No one could ever say, I saw him reading a book. I saw him with Ezra Pound's poetry. I saw him reading the new biography. I saw him reading, I mean, if you're that kind of person, you could spend your life in the books. And he never read a book. It was all for show. And it's extraordinary. I mean, obviously he's had some kind of brilliance. But I'm going to say both, because Smith is also fascinating in that he did what he did on his own, right? I mean, he robbed a Sears perfectly on his own. He murdered his son-in-law and daughter on his own and disposed of the bodies. But he was a sociopath, right? He didn't feel any remorse for it. But Bradfield, just the way he was involved with these people, the way he used them, the way he controlled them, it's just fascinating.
I would go with the same character, but I'm going to go a little left here, a little right. I thought Sue Myers was an interesting character, who was the longtime girlfriend of Bill, because she stuck it out. And there are many times in the book where she'd go, I want to see how this plays out. I want to see the ending here. And I thought, who does that? And obviously he picked people around his life who definitely had some voids in their lives and definitely were easy to be manipulated. And he did this, he was pretty strategic who he had around him, and then also who he let get connected as well. He didn't let them all come in one room together, that's for sure. His lovers, and then these young men that he was with. And so that being said, it was interesting for me, because I thought, man, there's such a power play in this book. From Bill Bradfield to his women and his friends, and then also from Jay to Bradfield, right? And so there's always someone making a power play, and for her, she definitely was played, but she wasn't dumb enough to not know that was happening. She knew it was. She was one of the few characters who actually knew it was happening. She was like, "Oh, I know this is happening to me. Let me just see how it's going to play out." Which I don't know if that's is that something to say, oh, what a wonderful thing, or to say, hey, you know what, this is something that you could kind of feel sorry for. But she wasn't the kind of character I felt sorry for. I felt like she knew exactly what she was doing. So, but at the same time, it did make me think about the 70s and how men talk to women, because there were some times where you saw Jay talking to women, even Bill Bradfield, and it's like, wow, man, just so dark sometimes, and so ugly, and really definitely treating them like they're second class. And so it just was kind of eye-awakening that happened. I can't imagine that happening in schools today, where principals were talking to teachers about their sex life, and it's just so dark and just gross. And so, with that being said, I felt like she was an interesting character, and I thought this author was awesome by bringing all these characters in. It wasn't like just these two, devilish men. No, you had to have this whole barrage of people to intertwine in this story, to start thinking, wow, this is a little deeper. This is real life, where people have relationships and people are able to be manipulated. And so, yeah, he's a fantastic writer. I can't wait to read his other books. This is the first one I've read.
He can't, nor can the police, hide their disdain for Sue Myers. They really can't, especially once the children are involved, right? I mean, she had a pathetic life that she didn't have to lead, right? There's something wrong with all of these people, right? There's
Oh yeah.
something wrong with Sue Myers. She had no self-esteem.
And
She
you
was
know, that's,
pathetic and meek,
yeah.
and she went along with everything, and she didn't, she was, her self-esteem was at a 1
Yeah.
on a 1 to a million. I mean, she just, and they might have even used the word pathetic, and
I think
but
so.
they were mad when it got to this point with the children. You could also tell the police weren't upset with Sue Reinert being murdered as
So,
much as what happened to her children, because the police hated all of these people.
Yeah.
And that's the pity with police work, is that those are
yeah.
the people you're dealing with.
Now, most of their red hot rage was, of course, focused on Bill Bradfield and then later Jay Smith. But I do want to mention Bill Bradfield dedicated his energy on women that were insecure.
Oh yeah.
And he actually kind of created this circle of people who were just devoted to him. And as you mentioned, Gerhardt, he didn't read. He's an English teacher. He was fascinated and learned Greek and took Greek classes, and came off as this expert on Ezra Pound. So it's instructive to see that side of him, because if somebody wanted to see how to start a cult, or maybe not, how to start a cult, but why cults happen, you could just see the slavish type of mentality and attitudes of Chris Pappas, another teacher, Vince Velitis, I believe it was, another teacher, Sue Myers, and the ultimate victim, Susan Reinhardt, who just never questioned this guy. We're going to do this. And there's some real cult-like passages about this. I mean, we're talking about, I think Jay Smith is going to kill Susan Reinhardt this weekend. Really? Chris Pappas was saying. How do you know? I just he gave a code. He made an implication here, and they never go to the police. What kind of a mind? What kind of a
They never go to
slave?
Susan. They never talk to Susan about it.
Oh,
They
it's
were freaks. I mean, they were all, and they're early in the book. There's passages where there's some quotations from other teachers. Now, a school like Upper Merion would have had 20, 25 English teachers. So
Wow.
that staff was broken, because some of the teachers, like, he's a moron. Bradfield doesn't know what he's talking about. Bradfield's an idiot. Bradfield's is a magician. He's
Pseudo intellectual. Yeah.
yeah.
there was at one
Dilettante.
point a teacher mentioned that if you asked him more than one question, or you asked him more than a couple of questions about a topic or an author, he couldn't do it. He only gave you the surface answer that he probably read on Cliff's Notes or some interview that everybody knew. But he had no depth to him. He just had this charm.
Do you think he chose Ezra Pound as his, icon, because most people don't get, or most people can't really articulate Ezra Pound, and so he picked this one and said, "Okay, I could pick this one, and no one else is really going to understand him."
It's
so,
weird, it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, you read Ezra Pound and you walk away thinking, what's Ezra Pound trying to say? Well, I know what he's trying to say. Clearly, you haven't reached, a particular my level. So it is. I want to just give a little shout out to the character of Jay Smith, in the sense that when I read this guy and the nitric acid in his vaults and the books and the sexual peccadillos and interest and things like that, and his amphibious eyes and his goat-like face, I remember reading that and thinking, if a student described this type of character, so he's the principal of the school, he's letting the school go to pot, the students are doing whatever they want, he's talking sexual ideas with some of the teachers, he goes in jail for theft, and I remember thinking, if somebody wrote this character as a fictional character, I would have said, he's too over the top. Bring him down a little bit. Give him some softer edges.
Yeah.
but he's this real guy,
But that's what tells me that gives me that like 10% possibility that he wasn't involved, because it just seemed too much like a fairy tale or like a horror story, that this is like the perfect person to do this. This is the and like you shared, he robbed, right, and he got away with some of this stuff, and who knows what happened to his daughter and his son-in-law, and
No,
so
everybody knows what happened to his daughter and son-in-law.
oh, they're dead, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
he killed them in the basement and dissolved their bodies in acid
right, but I mean,
and put it in and brought it to school and put it in the trash.
right, but did that at the end? I mean, was that 100% like everyone bought that at the
well,
end?
well, that is true. I think what you're suggesting, Jacob Aguilar, is
Yeah,
not necessarily mean he killed this
right.
person, but I will say though there are some incriminate. So
Yeah.
I think we all, Bill Bradfield has a direct connection
Oh
to.
yeah, for
This
sure.
is the discussion that we had, Mr. Gerhardt,
Yeah, this is a little.
before the video. Bill Bradfield had that direct connection to the murder of Susan Reiner in the sense that he was a beneficiary of the will, right? Jay Smith is not as direct. However, there are some pieces that demonstrate he's guilty, including the comb in the trunk.
Yes. Yeah.
And the pin.
The pin. There was the child's pin
Yeah.
was found among his possessions later on in the investigation when Jay was in prison.
Yeah. And we, and there's also something about Reiner was going, what did Reiner know? Because they can't answer this question. And what was she going to do? Now, she was definitely planning on saying that Bill is lying under oath at Jay Smith's trial. And that's probably what got it to say, okay, let's get rid of her. But then, of course, the police say October 28th, when Reinert's mother died, that's when Bradfield put it into action, because then that's where the money came in. But I mean, the way he took money from her, the way he took that cash is just, it's unbelievable. It is evil, right? It's evil.
I still can't get how he was able to get her to sign off on everything. I mean,
it's
I guess his personality. I mean, because he did it with everybody else, but I can't see someone doing that. It's like,
and
what?
the bank manager testifying, say, I stopped her.
Yeah.
I went to an obsolete law to not let her do this because it was so insane that in 1978 she was going to take thousands and thousands of dollars and put it in a business, cash.
She was trying to take $25,000 in one sum.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, the banker was trying to stop her.
Yeah. And her brother testified that she called him and said, I have a no loose business deal. It's going to be $25,000. You're going to get 12.5% back. Because that's what Bill Bradfield says. So a man who doesn't have anything, by the way.
Right.
That money is going to be basically given to Bill Bradfield as they get married. So so this is what's hard to believe. So it's so convoluted that we're missing some stuff. Maybe the audience will catch up by me saying this. It's hard to believe that this woman would give him so much money upon their marriage, Susan, who ended up dying, getting murdered, probably by Bill Bradfield eventually, but because he had so many girlfriends. He had so many promises out to so many women.
And it wasn't like hidden so much. I mean, he kind of left it out there, right?
I mean, these are women that he's being seen walking out of the house. Every one of these women, now we're talking about a girl named Rachel, that time fails us to bring out these other women. Shally, is it Shally?
I think it's Shally.
Sue Myers, that we had already mentioned. Susan Reiner, who was the victim. All these women, they know about each other. And yet Susan Reiner chooses this man, leaves her husband for him.
Oh. To go back to that, what you said too about his intellectual prowess or lack thereof. there's a part where some of the teachers were interviewed. They said things, and one person said, "quote He's a bearded despot with a good 2-line opening on any subject, but nothing more."
Ah,
And
great
then there
line.
was a time they were at a cocktail party or something and there was a college professor who was, studied the subject, and he wrote, Bradfield walked away from the conversation as if he'd found a maggot in his meatball. From then on, that teacher's husband was of the opinion that Bill Bradfield's Confucian epigrams came from the Hong Kong Noodle Company, and Bill Bradfield avoided that man like a vampire avoids the sun. And that was the epitome. So I guess somebody had said, "Hey, Bill knows a lot about Confucius." And this person was like, and then just like, oh my God, he doesn't know what he's talking about at all.
Right.
I think that if people who are interested in psychology, if you just read this book to look at this guy, you see this really, we could call him evil and dark, but the levels of dishonesty, the way in which he manipulated everybody around him, except for people that you're mentioning, questioned it, who dared to peek a little bit deeper. They weren't manipulated,
But
but it's so fascinating to see.
Oh yeah, a couple things. One, somebody called him a Rasputin in the book somewhere. I can't remember where, but and that's true. And also, but you know what? Somebody who didn't, who he didn't fool was also Jay. Jay right away knew what he was about and called him a pseudo intellectual and didn't really have any respect for him. And I'm not sure if it's because he was kind of a union guy, but I think it was also because he saw through him, just like these other teachers did, or these other teachers' husbands did. Yeah. And so, yeah, Jay knew who he was too, because Jay was actually a lot, much more brighter than Bill, right? Maybe not the smartest
Smith
criminal, but
there was that part where they described Smith would use words that were very esoteric and rarely used, and then sometimes he would use words and they didn't exist.
Yeah.
And then someone else described him when they went out in the hallway. These conversations were these intellectual, he used words that nobody understood. And then in his office with the door closed, he talked like a teamster. It's just remarkable. I mean, it's just, to have one lunatic and a teaching staff is kind of amazing, but to have two, like, could you imagine being a student at the school and having Bradfield talk for an hour? Or not Bradfield.
No, it was Smith. A whole period.
This is your principal, and to talk for an hour. And apparently the students were like messing with him because they were sending in notes saying, "Hey, we have questions that need to be answered." And then he would talk and talk and talk. It's just amazing.
Right. Kids are smart.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
I think towards the end, I think he was doing 2 periods a day. I mean, he was doing, can you imagine just talking for 2 hours? Just
but nuts. What did he do? Like, it kind of makes you think, the machine that runs on its own, of just like, the guy obviously was not doing his job. I mean, he was busy murdering people, right?
Yeah.
But what, and then how much, did he just sign off on things and say, "That's good, and I love that, that's a great idea"? It's kind of makes you think, it's a good gig if you can get it.
Yes.
But I wonder if there's something of, the 60s were, high school in the 60s were still like, you wear a dress code, right?
Right.
You weren't allowed in the classroom with jeans. You were just, you did not misbehave, right? And then when I was in high school in the late 80s, we had an open campus. We could walk off of campus whenever we wanted. The school was really, you were expected to be an adult. And if you weren't, you failed. Now the school is completely different. But I wonder if there was something about the way education had changed, and it changed so fast in the 70s that there just wasn't time to catch up and say, "Hey, what the hell is going on in this high school?" Because it was a good high school.
Yeah. It was fascinating to see all the testimonials of the students who graduated later on.
Yeah.
And fellow teachers too, but and then they didn't even count all the letters that came in. And I always just as I read that, I was thinking, oh, I'd be fascinated to peek in as to what he was doing as a teacher. What made him that effective? I could just picture him lecturing though, but that's all I could imagine him doing, just sitting there lecturing in a pompous way. But clearly he did something.
Yeah.
Did something right. I do want to mention that one of my favorite part. So I've read Wamba before, and what I like about him, he does write, I think, from the viewpoint at times of a cop or a detective. I know he spent time in the 70s as an LAPD detective, and I really like that part in which the detectives Jack Holtz, Joe Van Nort, come upon the car. They start investigating this particular part, looking closer as they approach the car. He saw Holtz that everything around the driver's side of the car had been wiped, and instead of just wiping down the rearview mirror, the suspect had removed it. Jack Holtz doubted that they'd get any relevant latent prints. That's on page 159 of a roughly 350-page book. But for me, that's when the book really started burning. It took off, like a buck. I mean, it just went because the investigation was on, and these guys were very thorough. And that to me is the best part of a Wamba book is the attention to detail of the detectives. And one of the detectives didn't live to see Bradfield arrested, but it was fantastic part of the book I wanted to bring out.
Well, I think that's what makes him an amazing writer, right? Because I guess a lot of times these writers, they have to draw from, no, they don't have to, but the good ones draw from experience, right? They draw from their own work, and or they know that lingo. They know, because I know that type of talk. I know the teacher, when they're talking about the teaching piece, I could understand, and I could see that power struggle or that power, between teacher and student and principal and teacher. But with the police, I don't understand that type of talk. But I love to get in that world. And he did a really good job to paint that world for us, I thought. And that it's just enjoyable. Just like I said, I can't think of a time recently where I couldn't stop putting the book. I mean, I just want to keep reading. Yeah. Right. So
I recommend The Onion Field and The Blooding. He also does something about the guy who set fires in Burbank, but he was the fire chief.
Oh yeah.
Arson investigator. That's a great one. But The Blooding is another one you just can't put it down. But was there a particular quote or moment in the book that was especially suspenseful or chilling for you? Either of you?
Everything about when Bradfield says about 3 days after the murder to Sue Myers, or he says, "Oh, how old were they? How old were the children?"
Mm.
That's like, whoa.
Mm.
And that hits home where I think it maybe is Meyer, like, oh, the children are dead.
Yeah.
I have it here. I'll find it. You keep on going.
It's like chapter 15 or so. I remember that.
Yeah.
Around there. I was going to share a little bit before that, maybe where the little girl Karen, I think she's talking to her grandparents or she's talking to someone, and they ask about Bill, and he goes, well, he likes my brother's pancakes and he likes my sandwich, and he says they're good, but I don't think he's telling the truth. How can you like both? And a child sees right through him. She says, I don't think he's on. I think she said something like, I don't think he's honest. He's being honest. He's not. And I thought, wow, she got it. She figured him out in her own way, right? I mean, she knew something was up with him. And to me, I got a little bit like, whoa, this is like just a little foreshadowing of what's maybe even going to happen to this little girl, that she's going to have to deal with this guy in a different way, right? I couldn't understand how he would kill these kids that he spent time with,
Yeah.
I mean, he played ball. I mean, he played catch with the little boy, and he wrestled. He taught him how to wrestle because he was a wrestler, right? And he's in part. I mean, I guess because I have children, and I know you do too, Jake. I just can't get it. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Anybody who touches a child, I mean, that's why this, like Ruben said before, that's why it's haunting, because it involved children.
Yeah. I mean, that's what my mother, 81 years old. She said, oh, they never found those kids.
So
And I was that age at that time, right? The six of us were all running around and,
Oh, geez.
But yeah, it's Sharon Lee who was a teacher at Upper Merion and stayed friends with Susan Reinert when she left. She said, and Bill said, "Oh yes, the children. How old were they?" And that just shocks her. And yeah, yeah.
we all picked a part of the book that dealt with the children, because mine is also that. So listen to this. You guys will remember this. The car had just been discovered in which Susan Reinert was found murdered. So Jack Holtz was called upon. He's the detective. He just saw this. He had to go tell the ex-husband, Ken Reinert, what happened. After Ken Reinert identified the body of his ex-wife, Jack Holtz took him out for some coffee. He was in the company of the state police for 2 hours answering questions because, as we know, as it mentions, Ken Reinert is the number one suspect at this point, because this is how fresh the investigation was. They go, the ex-lover or the lover is always suspect number one. So he's answering questions and adjusting to the shock of the violent death of his ex-wife. Suddenly, he looked at the investigators and had a thought. He wondered if the kids were with the neighbors or Pat Schnurr, or who's taking care of the kids, Ken Reinert asked. And an investigator said, what kids?
Oh, yeah.
Ay, ay, ay.
Ah.
Just chilling.
Yeah, it's.
And can we be honest? I mean, I think the kids are referred to and talked about maybe 5% of the book, and that's the 5% that we go back to, right? It's like it's
And then
big.
that poor guy, if you remember, also when he called, I underlined it, when he called his parents. I think he calls his parents, or maybe he calls Susan's parents. No, he calls his parents to say Susan died. My ex-wife died. And he says initially she was in a car accident.
Yeah.
And he said to the police, I don't know why I said that. And of course you didn't. His initial reaction was, okay, she died in a car accident. I'm going to.
And that little detail bumped him up higher on the suspect list.
Right. And I could see that, but I could also see why he did it. I mean, I could see myself doing that to my wife, like not wanting to tell her the horrific thing, and then later on saying, "Oh, I gotta tell her."
Yeah, it says here, he was astonished to discover that he couldn't tell the truth. He told his parents that she'd been killed in a car accident, and then he calls them back later on, and he says, "I'm sorry, she was murdered." But that makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes sense. But you're right, Ruben. I forgot about that. What kids?
Yeah. Well, I recommend this book highly. And I guess I didn't ask this question, and I had mentioned that I wanted to bring it up. The idea of the setting of the school, did it add an extra sense of interest or relevance for you, in the sense that these are teachers, you relate to it, you understand this world, and maybe you can understand a little bit more of the ladies and papas and their response to this guy they didn't question him. I mean, or maybe I don't know. Does the setting mean anything to you?
We've seen that before, right? Like in your life, we've run across people who we think are very nice people. And then we see that, like, outside of how we know them, they're with somebody that we think is horrible. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what that is, but obviously there's something that, so I think for what Bradfield did to these people, and I find that, like, that the psychology of Bradfield is interesting, but more importantly to me is the psychology of the others who were a part of it. What was wrong with them that they fell for this? Right? Because the other teachers were laughing at them And there were probably a lot of students at the school who weren't the smartest kids who were saying, that guy's full of crap. I'm going to trade school. I'm not going to Columbia, but that dude's full of it. There's definitely something about that common sense that we have. But it's interesting because, you think like, there were some things when I was in school, there were some things that I knew about the school later on that were pretty, that this was a place that, there were there were people who made mistakes. I had a great teacher. I was just talking about him with a friend of mine in middle school. We just loved this guy. He was a great teacher, and he taught us stuff in the 6th grade. And when we were in high school, he went to prison. And my friend and I were like, what happened? I'll just tell you, he burnt down his house. He was going through a nasty divorce. He burnt down his house, and it was arson. And I think he may have even started the paperwork for insurance, so he was screwed, and he was a car salesman after that. But there was so much more obviously to his life than those 50 minutes with us. He was dedicated for those 50 minutes. And he obviously prepared some great lessons, but when his marriage fell apart, something went wrong. And, so you just, it'd be really interesting. I mean, a high school, I haven't taught in a really big school in a long time, but a big high school there's 100 teachers, 150 teachers, 200 teachers.
That's what
And
I have. We have over 200 teachers.
Yeah. And it really makes you think. But more than anything, I'm just interested, and that guy, Vince Vitalis, was very Catholic
Mm-hmm.
and believed in the devil.
Yeah.
And he was like, this guy's evil. He's evil. Smith is evil. Even though Smith had not done anything to him, it just freaked him out.
And he believed that maybe the saint was Bill Bradfield for most of this story.
Yeah.
And I think what made Bradfield, well, you can color Jay Smith as the devil very easily because he's not in touch with these other teachers as much. But Bradfield mixed a lot of truth with his lies. So that helped that relationship and that trust build. But what a strange man.
Oh yeah. I mean, going back to that question regarding setting, I just think that I've been through that area, and I know Jake has lived there. I feel like this could have happened anywhere, really, but I think the idea was it could happen in a small town like this, a town that was founded by Quakers, right? Very religious town, and the devil could come out of there. Devils in this case, right? Devils. But even going back with Jake shared regarding teachers, it's funny, Jake, sometimes my students will find me or see me at a store somewhere and they can't believe it because I don't belong outside the school. That's where I'm supposed to be. And if I were to do something wrong or anything, that would just blow their mind. And I could see how a lot of these students were probably couldn't comprehend it for years. I read a couple of letters later, and then they're like, yeah, just really couldn't picture that, and so because they do put us in a different realm, and they don't, and at the same time you kind of want them to say, hey, and I try to do that every so often. I go, guys, I'm just like you. I have a family, I have children, I make mistakes, and so, but they don't always see it, so they're so impressionable, right?
They don't see that you make mistakes.
I know. I always tell them.
You clearly I'm
just a wonderful figure.
Your students are they normal?
No, not just me, but teachers.
Any last words about this book?
Can I just make a comment? This Robert Blake just passed away. He was in the movie In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, and of course involved probably with the murder of his wife. I think his third wife. And so this became a little eerie reading this book. I'm like, what a strange time to read this book after Robert Blake's dying, and just thinking about people, how I just can't picture murdering somebody. I mean, that just the darkest thing to do, right, is to take someone's life, and to do that with children. It just for me, it was a little hard to read. Even though I was reading it, it was still kind of like, oh, this is so ugly, so devilish. But it did remind me that humans could go in that dark place, and geez, it was tough.
Hard to read,
Gosh,
but
yeah, it's just such a fascinating. So it's so well done. It tells the story really well. And you mentioned about Wamba being an ex-cop, and that drives the story too. He has the sympathy, for the police and the work that they do. That's tireless. They never stopped. They never stopped, and they just, they were grinding nonstop to get this case solved and have some sort of justice. And it's just, when you read these things, and then when the things happen in the news, you sort of, there was another one in Philadelphia that I always remembered, with this guy who was he was the leader of the, the late 60s anti-establishment guy. His name was Ira Einhorn, and he was like a perpetual student at Penn, and defund the police and everything that people talk about today. They were doing it then. And one day in his apartment, people are complaining that there's a smell in his apartment. And finally the police go in, and there's the rotting corpse of his girlfriend, who made the mistake of trying to break up with him. The guy was a psycho. So here is this guy who was he had meetings with the mayor, everybody, he was untouchable. He was a murderer. And then he went, Arlen Specter helped him get out. He was before he was a senator, he was like the district attorney in Philadelphia. And then this guy skipped right out of France and lived almost his entire life in France, was remarried, happily lived on a farm. And his parents died, and policemen died. And the police fought for 35 years. And they finally had the man extradited to the United States to serve his prison sentence. But
wow,
it was just, what I remember about that more than anything, of course, this beautiful young girl being snuffed out because she made the mistake of going out with him, but the family dying during that time. And I had a classmate who was in high school who was murdered, and her father died right before the trial. He just dropped dead of a heart attack. And I knew the guy, and he died of heartache. He died of heartache. And it was just, those things happen. You hope to God it doesn't, it doesn't happen to you, and that somebody falls for it. But she was this brilliant student and lawyer. I mean, she was like the youngest lawyer as a partner in this huge firm with Ivy League credentials. And her husband was a scumbag. And I remember it because remember George Costanza's lie was always that he was in plastics and import export. That's what her husband said that he did. He was an importer and exporter of something. And then when his financial world fell behind, he did that to his wife to try to get the insurance. So it makes you, as I was reading this, I remembered that. I remembered watching the news every night. It was on the news. And then, of course, I remembered some of the other things that had happened. And you just think,
it's
sometimes I mean, I'm the son of a cop, right? So, and my uncles and people. And so I'm sort of a lot like, well, I don't know if I like the alternative of having these people running around doing what they want,
Must have been interesting as you read this. I guess it's the second time you've read it, correct, Mr. Gerhardt? Yeah. You had mentioned that earlier. It's the second time I've read it too. And but as you read it, you see some of the places you grew up and you drove through, walked through. I think I can relate to that to an extent when there's a book called My Dark Places, written by James Ellroy, very famous crime novelist, but it's about the murder of his mother. And she was found in El Monte. But he goes into El Monte, Monterey Park, Montebello, San Gabriel area. And I remember I had read it while I was living in Montebello at the time. And I was just, it was so fascinating to see these areas around where I lived and grew up around. So I do also want to mention that, did you, as we sign off, you get the sense, like you mentioned, that this is a cop writing this, but also did you see some of the sly humor he would throw in at times? It was kind of nice. It wasn't all darkness.
Yeah, you know, it was great when the cops, when the FBI Mullen says, "I want to meet with her, and I'm going to meet her like at the mall." The shot of the, but I want some state police there just so she doesn't say that I do anything, you know. And the state police were so offended by the way the FBI asked it, as if they weren't, that they put on those noses and glasses and mustache, and then they had newspapers with holes in it. And so they were, and then Mullen was like, "Okay, I get it. Just, you know, I'm sorry, you know." But there was a lot of that from Van Noort, especially, right? You know, these guys don't know what they're talking about. These guys, the FBI, they're a bunch of accountants.
So the
They don't know
FBI
the real
came in to assist
Yeah.
the police, and
I think it's like 7 years before it was all finally all done there, right? Yeah, it took a while.
But you know, and that happens, right? I mean, you know, there's you know, do it this way, do that way. In fact, there was something where the cop said, "I want to arrest her right now," and the FBI was like, "No, no, 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 no." And the FBI got the prosecutor to talk to the cop and say, "Don't arrest her now. We don't have enough evidence. Don't arrest her now." And he arrested her, and then they got the information, and then it got the ball rolling. And the FBI guy said, "You were right. You know, you were right. That was the right call."
He credited that arrest as turning the case around.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Very good.
And it is crazy to think, like, you know, because you do get this part of like, they didn't do that much of this, but like, it's got to go to a prosecutor.
Yeah.
And then the prosecutor has to have enough evidence to hold somebody for trial. So like, there's no, you can only imagine how many times the cops have, you know, everything. They know everything. They just don't have the evidence. In fact, my dad, I think my dad probably was stumped on one case his entire career, because everybody knew exactly who did the stuff.
Yeah.
It's the world is, you know, he always described it as just the same as a school. Everybody knows who did it. It's just a matter of finding out. And there was one case that he did not get until maybe 16 years later. And, but everything else, everybody knows each other. Everybody knows who does it.
Mm.
You know,
when in doubt, it's the boyfriend or husband.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we appreciate you, Jacob Gerhardt, for joining us to talk about Echoes in the Darkness. You will learn a lot, but we warned you, it's pretty twisted. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time, everybody. Goodbye.